Hello everybody, welcome back to more Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. We are up to chapter 13 now, and getting to be about halfway through this first book, which is good. There's a thing about it, because it is a longer book, but the chapters are longer, so when you get through the chapters, you actually make a good progress. It's quite good. I like that. It doesn't feel like it's taking forever. Okay, so chapter 13, Martha is returning back to Marytown, and she had something that she wanted to do before she retired for the evening, and she's invited Stefan to come along with her. So let's see what happens. Chapter 13. Outside of Stefan's private hut in the wooden Nephilim base camp, Martha let her otherworldly protector finally take her in his arms. Not for a cuddle, though that might have been a comforting bonus. It was for more practical reasons. She was a human-born Nephilim who couldn't metaphysically fly. The act of moving from one location to another via the in-between space that her kind referred to as the ether was a skill that she'd once attempted but failed to master, her strong emotional ties to the mortal realm mentally tethering her to it, a product of her upbringing and her dominant humanity. The training regime that she'd undertaken to become an active Nephilim warrior had been vigorously intensive, but it can never make up for her not spending her formative years on the Mount, basking in its celestial essence and embracing her angelic parentage. Had she been raised there, as her male counterparts were, she might have had a more powerful skill set, a stronger fortitude, and be truly Nephilim in every sense of the lofty title. As it was, she was what they called human-born, inherently weaker than the Nephilim of the Mount, a moniker that she resented more than the injustice of her birth, and how it had affected what she was now able to do metaphysically. As the visible world blurred away around her and Stefan, however, she sealed her eyes and buried her face into the front of his coat, making peace with whatever fate had chosen for her. She had bigger worries. Like maybe not throwing up all over the incredible Nephilim male's robust chest because she found the stomach-dropping sensation of her 2 feet leaving the ground so jarring, on par with being on the super-fast drop of a roller coaster, only she'd never really been a fan of the funfair. It made her feel physically queasy, gave her awful vertigo. She curled her fingers, held on white-knuckle tight, still absolutely terrified. For his part, Stefan seemed to hold on to her a little more ardently than he normally might, his thick arms enveloping her close. His hand cradled the back of her head, and once again gloved fingers buried into the waves of her messy hair as if he were physically attempting to coax her into relaxation, into letting all of her anxieties about the impending journey go, for she was safe. Any other day, Martha might have believed him. Though his breathing sounded like the wind in her ears, drowning out any other noise like usual, she could still feel the tension in him that denoted how alert and prepared he was for the possibility of them being ambushed the second they attempted to cross the border back into Marytown, perhaps by one of the worst monsters Martha had ever encountered alone or with backup, the so-called Demon of Wrath, the Dark King's brutal warning. Stefan was doing everything that he'd claimed he'd do, keeping her safe, guarding her with his fervent protection. But she knew that he was not pleased about the location she'd requested to be taken to, even less than he would have been to take her immediately back to the place where she'd been residing within Marytown, a place that he'd repeatedly and verbally refused to call her home, for that was up on the Mount, and she shared it with him. An early autumnal dusk had begun to settle over the town as he brought them back down to earth on the small lawn in front of the haunted house, and Martha couldn't help but feel like it had been a lot longer than a handful of hours since she'd been standing there with Olivia and Parker, full of trepidation that they knew they'd have to bury, if only they had known the full extent of the horrors they would face. Almost immediately, the 2 Nephilim warriors mutually disengaged from their enforced embrace, but Martha could instantly feel Stefan's eyes staring down at her, and knew she wasn't going to be able to simply pop inside, take care of business, and then ask him to carry her home. Sternly he inquired, "Are you certain this is necessary?" "No," she admitted, "but it's something that I have to do." Stefan wrinkled his nose in distaste, his eyes raised, astute gaze unhappily raking over the terraced building as if its mere existence was a blight upon the land that it was constructed on. Not an inaccurate description considering the current state inside, which was why Martha was there. She needed to try and find a solution to the problem her paranormal investigator friends appeared to have inherited with it before it got anybody else hurt, including them. "Evil has touched this place," her companion ominously said. "Even from out here you can smell the foul odour of death that it's left behind." "Doesn't smell much better inside," Martha attempted to jest, a line that didn't seem to make his distaste lessen whatsoever. "This is where you were before you were drawn across the border." "This is where the sorceress lived, yes. The woman who sold my stepfather the magical power to summon the demon that killed him. She was murdered by someone strong enough to bypass her magical defences. A woman. She hesitated before biting the bullet and stating, I think that it was avarice, but I've yet to find evidence that supports my theory. Stefan appeared to mutedly smile. You have been busy. Martha shrugged. I'm finding my feet. This might not even be connected to the demon, but the spread of its influence here is horrifying, and this witch might have been able to give me a solid lead, as she was familiar with the darkness, if not directly a part of it. I was hoping she'd help me uncover the network of servants so that I can work on severing the demon's human ties within the town. Maybe draw it out so that it can be eliminated by us. An ambitious plan. She allowed herself to smile. I learned from the very best. Stefan nodded, but he did not boast. He didn't need to. They were both more than aware that she'd been given the finest training available to her, including shadowing Azazel's most prolific sons on their quest to rid the world of demonkind. Few were ever granted such an opportunity. Sealing herself for trouble, she said, I should get this over with. Yes, Stefan agreed. You probably should. They both stood there for a fraction longer, before Martha pulled on her big brave Nephilim mindset and turned away from him, heading to the front door. He didn't follow. She hadn't been expecting him to, given the reaction that the Empire team had already received. There was a chance that the spectre of the dead woman was back where she'd been before, staring out at the world from her bedroom window. Martha wanted to try and not have a repeat performance of the violent outburst that their presence had sparked. Stefan made great backup, but he wasn't a diplomat, especially not when faced with a thing that had already hurt one of his own, hurt Martha. His presence could easily spark another fight if he was confronted with the spirit inside. And Martha was desperately hoping to avoid more carnage. Using the key that she kept from Olivia, she unlocked the door, pushed it open, scanning the dark hallways and staircases. The house was in bleak dimness, but there was still enough light for Martha to be able to scan her surroundings as she cautiously stepped over the threshold, heading in. The house once again felt like it stood empty, but she remained on guard, not prepared to be fooled twice. She'd been so nervous earlier on, nervous and battling some rather distracting emotional baggage involving the man that she was living with and the woman that he used to be married to. It was hard to state that she'd been lulled into a false sense of security, but she found herself stunned by the presence of the spirit. Now she felt ready to face it. Whatever Rebecca Patterson could throw at her, she would take. And if she got overwhelmed, she knew that she had backup that couldn't only handle himself better than the human male she cared far too much for, but could likely do more damage to the witch's wraiths than they could do to him. There was a little he hadn't faced and vanquished. Plus, he was carrying one hell of an incentive to prove that he could protect Martha. If the Spectre wanted trouble, Stefan would leap at the chance to fight. With a specific goal in mind, Martha immediately headed up the stairs to the bedroom that she'd encountered the spirit in. She didn't stop to pause for a moment, sitting down on the armchair in the cosy reading nook, and she didn't check the bathroom to admire the luxury bathtub. She wanted to find the undead witch that she'd clashed with more than once already that day, to establish for herself that the house would be safe, being left until the morning when she fully intended to conscript Joe Walsh into her service, coming back with her and doing what he did best to spirits. This was her last and only chance to try and make amends. The room was darker than it had been during the day, though the window was large enough that an eerie blanket of light managed to cascade into the house, illuminating the figure who was back where it had been the first time Martha had encountered it, staring forlornly out over Marytown Park, as if when Olivia's spells had eventually faded, a reset button had been switched. It was sort of creepy, but Martha didn't have the time to be fearful. This had to happen. Here went nothing. Pushing the door open as far as she could, Martha refrained from moving inside of the bedroom and encroaching on the dead woman's personal space again. First lesson learned. From the doorway she released her metaphysical barriers ever so slightly, cleared her throat, and spoke the woman's name. Once again, in a tone that was almost pleading. Not allowing herself to get despondent, she kept on trying. She had to. Rebecca, she sternly called, ignoring the slightest tightening of her throat to the hard pounding in her chest. I know you can hear me. You could hear me all along. I'm not here to harm you or disturb you. I only wish to talk. The spirit didn't acknowledge her, but Martha knew that her words were true and not simply wishful thinking. The spirit had retained much of her shrewd intelligence of the woman that had been in life, and she was choosing to take it as a good sign that she hadn't been attacked the moment she stepped through the front door. She was still insignificant, though, a silly little empath, not a threat. My name is Martha, she continued to speak. Martha Valentine. You did not know me, but you helped my stepfather before he died. Even though you weren't convinced that you should. You helped him because you were moved by how much you could see him suffer, but you were also wary about it. You mulled over it for days before you gave him what he wanted, and I think that means that you were a good person, with a good heart, that you truly cared. Almost imperceptibly, Martha saw the spirit's head move, all the curls shifting ever so slightly back and forth. A nod, perhaps? Maybe a shake of the head. Muted, but it was a response, and it gave her hope for more. Continuing, she announced. His name was William Ford. Suddenly, Rebecca Patterson was standing in front of her, facing her, and it was such a jarring shift that Martha thought not to recoil and make it appear as though she was intimidated by the sudden shock, which she was. She'd felt, heard and witnessed what this spectre was capable of. It had given her a healthy amount of respect for the woman it had once been, and a healthy bit of fear for the spirit that it had become following her death. Catching her breath, she murmured, "Well, that was a reaction." The dead witch stared her down, hard and unyielding. "Look, I don't know how well acquainted you were with my stepfather before you gave him your magic," she opted to carry on talking, to try and locate some common ground from which to proceed. The people who were involved in his death were his peers, his circle of aristocratic friends. They acted like he was a good man, because he had wealth and was one of their own. Martha shook her head, bitterly stating, "I think they were wrong. I knew William Ford, who he really was. I had it beaten into me more times than I can count when I was a child. He wasn't a good man, but you helped him anyway. Even though it ultimately got you killed, I wanted to thank you for doing that. It was probably a much fairer way for him to go than just drinking himself to death on overpriced whiskey." Rebecca Patterson's glassy eyes narrowed as if she was wondering why the empath who dared to abuse the nature of her death earlier on that day was now standing before her, wildly oversharing her life story, or equally possible that she was pondering if it would be more fun to simply flay the human alive, or stab her to death with metaphysical knives made of pure and undeserved rage, all over again. It was hard to say which it was. Nevertheless, Martha persisted. "The people who were here with me before, they work for a place called the Marytown Paranormal Investigation Agency. I don't know if you've ever heard of it." She paused. The spirit gave no response. "Oh, well, they're good people, and they came here to help. We didn't mean to encroach on your sanctuary, and Olivia, that's the other magic user. She's not a threat to you. She's been trying to find the person that hurt you, because she's a lot like you were once, I think. She also helps people, using her magic." Sensing a subtly darkening shift in the air, Martha quickly kept talking, kept trying to keep the spirit focused on her and not the memory of what had happened earlier on that day. Even the simple mention of Olivia seemed to trigger something that felt so sensitive. She eased away from it. "I understand, Rebecca," she assured me. "Believe me, I get where you're coming from. I'm not here to upset you or put any pressure on you. I know that I crossed the line before. I didn't mean to. I was defending myself. You were hurting my friend. But I was wrong to hurt you." The energy retreated, placated. Martha tried not to breathe a sigh of relief. Navigating this encounter was going to be a lot like inching through a verbal minefield, and she didn't want to step on something that could cost her a precious limb, or see her rendered to nothing more than a haze of red mist. Pressing forward, she reiterated, "As I said, my friends are professionals. They didn't come here to hurt you or make you feel like you have to leave your home if you're not ready. They want to be able to help you, Rebecca. They can do that, if you're willing to try." Spirit didn't respond to her offer, but did react to the words that Martha spoke in a voice that was painfully guttural, holding the distinct timbre of a pointed Slavic accent. It said one confusing word. "Friends." Yes, they were my friends, and they're good people. Her slender crimson-slashed arm flung outwards, a lengthy and elegantly manicured finger jutting in the direction of the window to the outside, and the spirit's sharp, broken voice repeated in the same word, only now it felt like a question, maybe also a demand for an explanation. "Friend." It took Martha a moment to realise that it was referring not to the fact that it wanted her magically inclined friend from Empire to leave the house in as brutal a fashion as possible, but the other companion that had accompanied her on the visit. Not Parker, not the magical Norm, no. The dangerous Nephilim warrior who was currently standing beyond the window. guarding the perimeter like a hawk so that a nasty brute of a demon didn't try and poke his nose into Martha's business again, a potential challenge. He is... Martha hesitated, unwilling to bring herself to simply call Stephen a friend. It didn't seem appropriate, even for the ears of a spirit who probably wouldn't know or care either way. He's somebody important to me, somebody special. He came with me this evening to protect me. He likes to do that, because I'm important to him too. Spirit brought her hand back towards her chest. Thinking she understood what was being asked, Martha sadly but honestly informed it. I don't think so, Rebecca. He'd bring the wrath of God down on you if we were to have a repeat of what happened earlier. Those glassy eyes narrowed again. Displeasure bubbled up in the air. Holding up her hands to try and show that she meant no harm, Martha explained, simply a fact. He wouldn't hesitate to leap to my defence if given a reason to, but I don't want that to happen, I assure you. The undead witch seemed to consider that for a harshly long moment, prompting Martha to state, he'll be staying outside, a promise that she hoped Stephen would be able to hear and would keep. Thus far this encounter had been going better, if not less tense than the one before. Martha took a moment to regroup as the spirit lowered its arm and went right back to staring at her, blank, rather than expectingly. Okay, so what now? The female Nephilim once again found herself regretting that she wasn't much better practiced at this. At times it felt like all that she'd inherited from her biological father was his rampantly overreactive empathy. She certainly wasn't much of a diplomat. She never had to negotiate with the spirit before. Recalling the conversation she'd had with Olivia in the waiting room of Dr. Leon Tully's clinic, she felt like she'd underestimated the humanity that could still be found within the dead witch. Rebecca Patterson could still be reasoned with, negotiated with, talked down from her deadly ledgers. Continued to try and build on the foundations that she'd lain, Martha confessed. I'm not much of a clairvoyant, but I was able to perform a touch reading on the amulet that you sold my father. A little bit of your power clung to it, and through it I was able to see what happened. She might have been over-empathising, but Martha thought that the spirit began to look a little bit sad upon hearing that, a slight shift in her features. The woman that did this to you, she carefully hedged, understanding that it might be a sensitive topic, that the spirit might not want to talk or even contemplate the horrific violence that it had been subjected to, but she had to try, find some answers. I think that she was a client of yours, perhaps somebody that you paid for the use of your magic, or somebody that paid you for the use of your magic. Is that right? After a moment of what seemed to be deliberation, the spirit shook its head, back and forth slowly, confusing and somewhat surprising Martha. Was she another type of acquaintance? She asked. Friend? Back and forth, firmer this time. Martha frowned, not knowing how to proceed again. It seemed like the spectre responded best to direct questions and it didn't have to try and verbally respond to. As she thought out loud. It seemed like you knew her. You let her into your sanctuary, but she was unhappy with you, angry about a thing that you'd done, perhaps for her. The emotionless eyes widened as if the spirit was taken by surprise by the summations, as if it couldn't comprehend how somebody that it had not known in life could have access to such knowledge. It wasn't an answer, but it was an opening that Martha was willing to exploit, and while she feared the response to her next question, Is that what happened? A despondent sorrow permeated the air, a tragic confirmation. Affected, Martha said, I'm so sorry for what you suffered, Rebecca. And the spirit didn't react to her compassion. She got the impression that it was unable to. She hoped that it could comprehend that she was genuine. Hating herself for having to delve in deeper, the female Nephilim drew in a deep breath and asked another question that she feared the answer to. Rebecca, was the woman that murdered you a demon? The response the victim had was so eerily like how Olivia had been stood, frozen in fear when she'd been confronted with the demon of wrath, and Martha knew that her innate go-to hunch had been accurate, and that she had confirmed something that was potentially game-changing for the state of her mission within Marytown. Under her breath, she muttered a silent curse to the monster that had viciously taken Rebecca Patterson's life, and whoever it was watching over. Under her breath, she muttered a silent curse to the monster that had viciously taken Rebecca Patterson's life, and to whoever it was that was watching over and guided her own, the almighty power that had randomly decided roughly about 3 decades ago that a female child would be born to a kind human mother in a monster's fruitful playground, and that it would become their burden to end its wicked and nasty little games. Demons were Martha Valentine's burden to bear. She knew them, better than she would ever have liked to have known them, knew their darkness, had tasted their evil. She had been at their violent mercy, but she knew that they could be slain. She could and would avenge Rebecca Patterson, but wow, it felt like an enormous asking now that it was a little bit closer to becoming reality. Now that she had a name to go with the face that she'd seen, and she knew that it was the face of her enemy. The woman, the demon that Martha had witnessed kill this woman had been a frightening and intimidating whirlwind of violence, one that rivaled the other potential that had already stared her down with hatred in his eyes. The odds were stacking up against the Nephilim forces in the area, but that wouldn't stop them. She knew she had to be the Nephilim that she'd come here to be, and so, standing face to face with the spectre of the witch that had inadvertently assisted in her stepfather's end, had tried to hurt Olivia Maxwell and had injured Parker, Martha didn't falter. Pressing a hand to her chest, she asked the undead witch, "I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I'm not merely an empath, Rebecca. I am the same as my friend outside. Do you know what else that I can do?" The spirit nodded warily. Martha wasn't entirely sure if that was a good or a bad thing, so she said, "If you are aware, then you'll know that it is within my power to avenge you, and I will. But I need your cooperation. Help me get to the people who are in league with the demon, and I'll gladly seek justice for you and all that have been hurt by its darkness. I give you my word, as a Nephilim of the mountain, the daughter of Gadriel, sent back to this town to reclaim it from the spoiling darkness. I swear to you that I will avenge you." An unambiguous determination filled her up, galvanised her from head to booted foot, for she knew the words that she spoke meant the weight of such a vow. If, by cracking herself wide open, exposing her whole mission to this unfortunate soul, she was risking ruining everything, then so be it. She was prepared to put it all on the line, to do what was right. "I'll do this, Rebecca," she promised. "I will. I swear it." The spirit, Rebecca Patterson, turned away from Martha, seeming to glide back towards the bedroom window, where, for a worrying moment, a sad mist of loss seemed to surround her, as she looked out over the same view that had brought such melancholy sadness. As if she might fall back into her eerie stillness, forget that a Nephilim had just offered her a hand in true justice. Then she appeared to gaze down, to the lawn at the front of the house, at Stefan. A wave of panic flooded Martha's chest as she vanished from sight into the ether. There was a loud crash from downstairs in the lounge. She turned on her heels and ran down the staircase that she'd already descended in panic once that day, only this time it wasn't because a male she cared about so deeply was stumped, bleeding on the ground. No. This time he was in the open front doorway, his massive body filling the frame. There was anger on his face. Anger and alertness. He was ready to fight. As she slowed to jog down the last few stairs, Martha held up her hand and pleaded with him. "No, it's okay, Stefan. It's fine. Stay out there." A look crossed his face, one of displeasure mixed with an indignance that she would order him around like she had the right. But he listened to her. Unlike the other man in her life when faced with a similar dilemma, he didn't try to breach the threshold and get inside. He could have done. Nothing was preventing him from storming the house and ridding it of all the nasty, potentially vengeful spirits in it once and for all. No magical barrier designed to stop angered male Nephilim warriors from bringing the wrath of God down on undead witches who dared to assault his protege. But he stayed the urge, acquiesced to Martha's instruction. He trusted her. Swallowing down her trepidation, she met his eyes, nodded once and took the handle of the door which led into the lounge. The room had been sealed off, whatever had occurred inside, slamming the door into its hinges so hard, the door into its frame so hard that it looked like it had splintered. As she slowly pushed it ajar, Martha used the door frame to give herself cover and leaned around it. Warily, she called out, "Rebecca?" That she didn't immediately get her face clawed off by an ancient wraith was a relief she hadn't expected to feel. There was nothing but silence and darkness in the room. Urging her arm through the gap that she'd formed, she reached in and found a switch for the light bulb on the ceiling, illuminating the lounge in stark off-white brightness to highlight not only every shadow, but every inch of the damage inside, the latent carnage of violent death. Martha already had an indelible image of the crime scene burned into her memory. Seeing it again did nothing for the anxiety in her stomach. She'd known that the lounge had got more even more dishevelled by the wraiths that had been trying to attack Olivia, but it looked like a whirlwind had blown through the room, picking up the heavy white sofa and tossing it to the other side, where it had smashed into the wall-mounted television set and two impressive ebony bookcases that had been guarding its flanks, like they were made of matchsticks. Broken glass, ornaments and books were scattered everywhere. The sofa was wrecked. Nothing left but destruction. The spirit of Rebecca Patterson was standing in the doorway to her large kitchen diner, what could only be described as an amused little smirk playing across her lips, an odd essence of playfulness that was disturbing as it felt endearing, though Martha stayed on guard, unsure if she should proceed. To be on the safe side, she requested, "May I enter, Rebecca?" The dead woman nodded, slowly, almost tauntingly. Easing the door open a little further, Martha moved into the lounge. She shut the door back behind her, then she felt Stefan move up as if he'd crept across the threshold and was occupying the small hallway at her back, just in case he needed to drag her back out of there. Though she wasn't foolish enough to hope the spectre was unaware of the action, she hid him from view, battling not to get annoyed with him for moving beyond the limits of where she'd asked him to remain. If the sofa tossing had been a display of her spectral dominance before Rebecca Patterson unleashed her army of wraiths on them, Stefan entering her house was a catalyst for war. If the witch didn't care, then Martha was just reaffirming their boundaries. Unsure of which way this was going to go, she waited by the door. The spirit raised her arm again, indicating that there was something hidden underneath the sofa that had previously been... Oh, thanks. There was something hidden underneath where the sofa had previously been that she wanted the Nephilim guest to acknowledge. Martha feared that she was going to ask the dead woman to be specific, seeing a few random household items that must have migrated or been pushed into the gap under the sofa and the floor. That and a lot of thick, cotton-like grey dust clinging to the carpet, denoting that it was an area of the house that the house-proud sorceress forgot or didn't see the point in trying to hoover, out of sight, out of mind. But nothing Martha could see was worthy of acknowledgement. A hardcover book suddenly lifted itself out of the mess, floating in the air like it would start to dance if it wasn't soon regarded. Surprised, Martha felt the need for clarification. "For me?" The spirit nodded its corkscrew-curled head, impishly eager. Being either boldly brave or recklessly foolish, Martha walked through the messy room. She kept her guard up, eyes scanning the four corners, recalling what Olivia had told her. 5 wraiths, 1 in each corner, 1 acting as a wild card, perhaps to distract Stefan as his cohorts moved in and tore her to tiny pieces, exacted their vengeful will upon her. Keeping her gaze locked on the spirit, she went down onto her haunches and plucked the book out of the air. It fell into her hands, a physical offering that she swiftly ensured she didn't drop, lest it seemed she was being rude or ungrateful for the gift. She'd offered Rebecca Patterson a deal, a trade, her skills and solemn vow to slay the demon in exchange for assistance bringing down its network of servants, the army of sycophantic human slaves that did its bidding. She hadn't known what such help might entail, but she hadn't been expecting for something like this to play out. Things were moving faster than she'd hoped, a recurring theme for that day, it felt. Curious about what she'd been given, Martha let her attention briefly fall away from the spirit and onto what she had in her hands, turning it over, feeling its heft, examining the cover. The book appeared old, leather-bound, decoratively embossed with thin silver vines on a blackened base, threading through its entire front and back. It carried no title, no words to indicate what it could contain, other than a symbol etched onto the spine, a simple 5-sided star with a circle wrapped around it, a symbol of faith linked to occultism. Raising her face, Martha intended to ask Rebecca if it had meaning to her, but the space in which the spirit had been standing was now intriguingly empty, a waft of satisfaction lingering like perfume on the air. Wherever the spirit had gone, likely back up at her bedroom to stare longingly out at the world from her window, she no longer posed a threat, at least not to Martha. Barely able to comprehend what had happened, she returned her gaze to the book in her hands, opening the cover, turning several of the thin, delicate pages of neatly scripted documentation. Shaking her head back and forth in astonishment, she didn't know what she could have possibly said to the spirit had she remained. Nothing short of gratitude seemed apt. She laughed, smiled, felt so much appreciation that she could burst. "Martha?" Stefan's voice nervously called to her from the hallway. "Yeah, I'm okay," she called back, nodding. "It's going to be okay." She heard him carefully opening the lounge door, felt him move into the room behind her, hesitating by the entrance. She felt his reaction to the mess, the remnants of the terrible affront that had happened within the four walls, and the effects of Rebecca Patterson kindly moving the sofa out of the way so that Martha could uncover what had been hidden underneath it. She felt his happiness, his concerns, his confusion. Right then she felt it all, and she almost wanted to bask in it, because her empathic psyche was still wide open and wildly receptive. She didn't bother trying to fix her mental barriers, though, not yet. Didn't bother half as much as it might have done any other time. Instead, Martha verbalised, "This is a ledger, a record of all the clients that Rebecca Patterson was providing magical assistance to, including who referred them to her, what they asked her to do, how much they paid. She kept a record, wrote it all down. She's just single-handedly handed me a list of what must be hundreds of names. Her clients, people with links, interests in the occult or simply magic, people who might be servants of the demon," she boldly marvelled. "Stefan, this is incredible. It's precisely what you were speaking," he found the words on her behalf. She smiled up at him, broadly, triumphantly. "Yes, maybe. I think so." He bowed his head somewhat mutedly, but Martha could feel his pride in her, matched only by his contentment that she'd managed to bring what could have been a potentially deadly situation to a peaceful resolution. This was a win. One that Martha felt that she'd badly needed. One that Martha was content to let her momentarily revel in. Pushing herself back to her feet, she felt like she was on top of the world and couldn't wait to return to Parker and Olivia so that she could tell them what she'd made happen, give them the good news, share this win with them. A potential metaphysical threat turned into an asset. The enemy of their enemy, perhaps now a friend. She liked to think that even Peter Maxwell and perhaps her father would be impressed by what she'd done. Though Martha would be hunting down the demon that had long enslaved Marytown, regardless of whether or not Rebecca Patterson could be reasoned with, it would have smarted more than she likely would have cared to admit to be made to force the witch into accepting her final rest. But it wouldn't have derailed her. She would have still found a way to get what she needed. With the melancholy spirit it brought her was an opening, one that she needed to find a way to quickly capitalise on. Turning to Stefan, Martha made certain to inform him of what else the spirit had given to them. "She told me that she was murdered by Mammon, the demon, here inside the border." Using a hand, she gestured to the state of the room they occupied. "This is a true violation of the pact. It should be the thing that gets our fathers to tear it to pieces. But on the off chance that it is not, I'm going to make sure that justice for this is served." Stefan responded, "I have every faith that you'll succeed." And she could taste the honesty, the unwavering belief in his words. With nothing left to say, they left the house that was occupied by the spirit of Rebecca Patterson behind, making sure that it was secure, locked up tight. Martha wouldn't be returning with Joe Walsh in the morning, though the Empire team still needed a way to ensure that the sorceress had kept up her side of the bargain, and that she posed no further threat. As they regrouped on the lawn, Martha couldn't help but look up at the house, at the window of the bedroom upstairs. She couldn't see Rebecca Patterson from where she was, and she wasn't sure why she felt disappointed about that. The only word that the spirit had spoken to her was an indication of the loneliness that she perhaps felt in her life, surrounded by so many people who wanted to use her for what they could give them. Not one of them had genuinely cared. Friend. As Stefan took her once again in his arms, she couldn't help but let that one word stay with her. A promise of what might yet to come. Okay. Chapter 13. Yeah. So, after a tough, very tough, hard day, Martha appears to have got a little bit of a win. Discovered some things that may help in her quest. I'm not going to say anything more about it, to be honest. I'm going to let what I read speak for itself. And hope that you come back to see what happens next time. Thank you, as always, for watching. Hope you're all taking care of yourselves and your family and everyone you love. I appreciate everybody. Have a lovely day. I'll see you soon.